Hi, welcome everyone. My name is Christina Herbin, and we're going to spend today's lecture discussing more about self-care and compassion. So as counselors, we work in a culture of one-way caring, and this requires us to demonstrate empathy, compassion, and patience without the expectation of receiving the same in return from our clients. It's imperative that clinicians take a proactive approach to self-care. Clinical training programs must devote time to teach about self-care, as this is a way to really prevent burnout, stress, and impaired clinicians. So today's agenda, we're going to discuss more about the impact. So we've been dealing with just our racial climate, pandemic, natural disasters, loss, life disruptions. All of these things can really weigh on our ability to remain compassionate to ourselves and others. And that can occur in our personal lives and in our professional lives. Compassion is attentiveness to the suffering of ourselves and others, with a desire to alleviate it. Compassion motivates action. And this is resonating right now at every level of our society as we continue to strive toward healing, equity, and justice. So we'll discuss some key terms of compassion, burnout, compassion fatigue, and resilience. And then lastly, we'll end by discussing what can we do? How do we remain compassionate to ourselves as clinicians? So when we think about the impact, this has been a profound and overwhelming time in more ways than one. As we reckon with just our racial climate, as we reckon with just aspects of our existence that impact our health, our well-being, and our quality of life. We've been faced with seeing viral videos or just statistics or news coverage that really continue to illuminate the racial disparities and racism that we're seeing still in year 2022. We've been living through a pandemic for years. We're still not out of the clear to get to a full space of healing, and we still have a lot of work to do as a society just to stay safe with the COVID pandemic and to really dismantle the system of racism that pretty much affects every sector of our life. And once we are able to emerge from the pandemic, some individuals' lives will never be the same. Just knowing the magnitude and just the spectrum of loss that people have had to go through. The demand for clinicians has increased exponentially, and as helpers, we're not immune to this list of stressors as we continue to support others in need. So take a quick moment just to reflect on what are some of these sources of stress that you're dealing with. And again, helpers are not immune to the impact of just what's happening in our world right now. We're going to spend some time discussing more about compassion, and I wanted to open up with a quote by Nelson Mandela. So our human compassion binds us, the one to the other, not in pity or patronizingly, but as human beings who have learned how to turn our common suffering into hope for the future. And I feel like just this quote resonated with me because I just felt like I was in this hamster wheel of never really being able to just stop and catch my breath because there was always something going on in our world, on top of helping others process what's happening in the world. And it's difficult to witness, to hear, to read about stories one after another, year after year, of Black lives or any life being so devalued. It leaves me just filled with just a lot of emotions. And as a clinician, session after session is spent processing these moments with each client who's impacted in just their own unique ways. So noticing this collective suffering, it really allowed me just to pause more often. Pausing to check in with myself, with others, and just to show a little bit more compassion to anyone I interact with. So compassion is defined as the awareness of someone else's pain coupled with the desire to help in alleviating it. So at the same time that we desire to alleviate another's distress, we also are confronted with the reality that we cannot fix another person's pain. Many of us provide the holding environment for our family members, our friends, students, colleagues, and clients, creating spaces for them to feel loved or heard or appreciated or respected. But imagine just the exhaustion that sets in and just the weight of what people are dealing with in their day-to-day lives, or what they're going through, or what they're witnessing, or what they're hearing about in the news. We tire because we're human. But humans are quite resilient. So resilience is defined as the process of adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, or any type of threat. And humans have been forced to be quite resilient during these times. We're going to review a couple other helpful terms. The first is burnout. So those are those days where you don't even want to get out of bed in the morning to start your day. It's just this general stress related to just the demands and expectations placed on you. And this is a whole new level of exhaustion that many people have been feeling for months, of just all the extra time and energy we have to use just to deal with this new pandemic lifestyle. And of course, all the struggles it's brought on. People may have lost loved ones, lost jobs. You could have missed out on some experience like a graduation, a wedding, or funeral. Many people have been cooped up or cut off from their usual hobbies, which has created this mental and physical exhaustion that tends to lower our resiliency and boost feelings of dread or helplessness. Secondary traumatic stress or vicarious trauma, this can occur just by viewing graphic news reports or stories, or just hearing the detailed traumatic events of something a person experienced. And this can lead to PTSD-like symptoms of intrusive thoughts, sleep disturbances, avoidant behavior, hypervigilance, irritability, anxiety, sleep disturbances. And we know that seeing stories over and over, or actual live footage on social media of some of these events that have occurred, it sometimes can worsen the effects, so lead to higher intensity of PTSD symptoms. Lastly is compassion fatigue. So compassion fatigue is just simply a decrease in a person's capacity to empathize with those who are suffering. And we lose our empathy. We may appear more irritable with people that we interact with. We have less patience, or some people just don't feel like themselves. And that's the worst spot for a helping professional to be in. And compassion fatigue can make a person less empathic to those suffering. And sometimes it creeps up slowly and over time. And sometimes it goes on even being unrecognized. So self-compassion for oneself is really no different than having compassion for others. So think about what that experience of compassion feels like first. And we know that we have to just notice the suffering of others. So we have to be aware that others are suffering is step one for us to remain compassionate. Secondly, we have to feel moved by the other's suffering. And us feeling moved leads us to want to take action. And the word compassion literally means to suffer with. So it's just our capacity to respond to those in pain. And then finally, when you feel compassion for another, it means you realize that suffering is part of the shared human experience or our collective humanity. So we really have to turn our energy within and treat ourselves with kindness and fairness, just the way you would treat a close friend. And to recognize that setbacks or disappointments, they're part of our collective humanity. But what can we do? Like, how can we remain compassionate during these unprecedented times? One tool is the wellness wheel. So this is a simple way that we can check in with ourselves, really to assess where are our strengths, to see what's already working well, and what would be those areas that require a little bit more attention. And the more that we see just how interconnected each of these different spheres are, it helps us to achieve this sense of balance and personal well-being. So you can take a look briefly at each of these 7 dimensions. When we think about our occupational health, spiritual health, intellectual, all of these require our intentional efforts to maintain them. And as you browse over this particular wellness wheel, what areas are strengths for you naturally? So do you find that you always prioritize sleep or exercise or socializing? And again, we must continue to do those things at work. And what areas need more attention? So what areas are the first to go out the window when we're stressed? And that really requires us to prioritize those more in detail, especially as clinicians in training. And I've shared a couple of resources. The first is an article that talks more about just why there's such a need for self-care to be taught in clinical training programs. We know that this will allow clinicians to stay well and to help others. So there is a need for more clinical training programs to teach more about self-care. The next resource is from Charles Figley, who is a leading researcher on burnout prevention and secondary traumatic stress. The Figley Institute provides a really helpful self-care workbook that has tons of inventories or resources and tools to really help a clinician, especially those who work with traumatized clients. Lastly is the ProQual, so the Professional Quality of Life. This is a helpful tool for clinicians really to understand the positive and negative aspects of helping those who have experienced trauma or suffering. So the awareness will really help to improve the helper's ability to help others and to maintain their well-being. So it's imperative for clinicians to use some of these self-care inventories and, of course, to develop your own self-care plan. So in conclusion, self-care is imperative for clinicians to maintain their longevity in the field, and there is a need for us to incorporate self-care training in clinical training programs. And this will ensure that clinicians have the necessary tools to be effective helpers and to remain well by prioritizing their holistic health, as we've witnessed in the 7 dimensions of wellness, so that wellness wheel. But thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have a wonderful day. Take care.